But there you go. All sorted. All sorted. Loud and clear. We clear. Everything else. I wish we were at the studio to do this, but obviously, pandemic and that.
What's COVID?
Yeah, what's COVID saying for you, though, by the way? Because obviously, it's different for everybody else. So, especially, I want to kind of hear what's going on.
So, yeah, I've been working since COVID. I work in mental health, so we've been just working digitally. So, I've been pretty much the same schedule, just obviously making things more digitalized. So, I've been the same. It hasn't really stopped for me, except I get the comfort of my own home to kind of work, and I decide my schedule kind of based around home. But yeah, I've been working at home now for like 3 months now. So it's
you're chilling, man. Because I was gone for like when I start working from home, like mid-March, and then I just like this past Wednesday, yesterday, I literally just started going back to work, but I can't take public transport, so I have to go bike. So it's like a 30-40 minute bike ride from my house to work, and I have to bike at 7 a.m. So I'm like, it's long, but we move. But it's good though. It is good for me anyway, so it's not like a big deal. It's not a big. This heat, oh Lord Jesus! I had to go up like 2-3 hills, two like small hills. But still, that heat, no. I had to take a break. Fam. That was long. But it was mad. Okay, cool. Yeah, 113. Back for another episode. Special guest in the building. And this is actually a surprise because I didn't even know you'd actually message me out the blue. So I was like, oh shit. Okay, cool. Read everything. And I remembered you did something with I think you did something with Kurtley on his live. Yeah. That was literally like the week before or the day before. Sorry, I did a live with him as well. So that was I was like, oh, I remember him. So yeah, all right, cool. Remember his face, whatever what he talks about and stuff. So that's always good to hear. But for people that don't know who you are and what you do, and it's obviously your first time on a podcast setting maybe, or in this specific platform, to tell people what you do especially and what you specialize as, really.
So my name's Lewis. I work in primarily mental health. So I work for a charity in Bristol called Off the Record. I work specifically for how do you conceptualize it, like a part of Off the Record called Project Zazie, which specializes in the BAME experience. So I work primarily with young BAME people aged 11 to 25, and I kind of specialize in social action or activism. So I train up young people within Bristol, whether it's in schools or community centres, to basically go out and do a madness against Babylon, and kind of just train them up to be activists, and from a young age start instilling that awareness around history, identity, and the wider cultural context. So that's what I do in terms of Off the Record. And I also I lecture up at UE a few times a year on personal development and academic success. So that's my other project outside of the OTL work. But generally speaking, I'm in the mental health space, whether that's activism, coaching, or mentoring. That's kind of where I am at the minute. So yeah,
that's good
what
though.
I do.
That's good because what I hear anyway, there's not many people that work in mental health that I know of anyway, as well as stories. We tell stories all the time about mental health, which is a normal thing at this point, but it's not as like someone's profession per se. So how did you get into that? Because it sounds like you could have made the choice straight away, but also you could have like had a certain calling and said, okay, this isn't working out, I'm going to change, because we change our minds a lot of times, or we have this moment of like realizing something like, okay, this is what I'm going to do, I prefer this. And
so I stumbled into mental health, and sort of I suppose coaching was the first step, right? So when I was in uni, I have a degree in psychology, And whilst I was studying for that, I really fell in love with like one-to-one mentoring. Like I just loved working with people and just helping them get to where they needed to be, or help them set goals, and the very basic stuff of mentoring was just like, I loved it. So to cut a long story short, what happened was I started working specifically with BAME people within university. So I was mentoring those guys and providing my experience as a just to the university standard. And I was a very successful student, someone who was doing a lot of different things. So I was trying to pass on as much information as I could, because, you know, the stats in terms of uni in particular is a bit of a mad thing in terms of if you're BAME in a university setting, the odds are stacked against you for a number of different reasons. So I was in that role for about a year. Again, I loved it. It opened up doors for me to start developing my own workshops. And again, like I said at the beginning, lecture in particular spaces. But in terms of off the record and how I got specifically into mental health, it was just being in the right place at the right time. So I graduated from uni in the summer. I had a few months off to work on my own business projects, and I got really sick. I got food poisoning from a place in London. I don't know where it was, but I know I got mad sick, and I was like ill for 2 weeks, and I wasn't working. I wasn't doing anything, and this kind of job opportunity came up for OTR, off the record, and it was like perfect. It was a social action role, so it was activism based. It needed mentoring experience, coaching experience, psychology experience, and I'd worked off the record before for a few years in different roles, sort of youth activism based, because that's how off the record kind of works. And I was basically, what I said when I graduated was there's two places I'd go to work if I couldn't start my own business. One of them was off the record, one of them was at UE. And off the record came up, and I was like, I've got to do it, even though I was mash up. Like I was like, I've got to put together this like crusty application, just kind of hope they remember me for some of the other stuff that I did, like maybe a couple of years prior. Did that, had an interview, and the rest is kind of not history, because I've been in the role for a very short time, but things kind of came together in that space. But for me, mental health, personal development, success, all those things are really what I love, and I always knew I was going to end up in that space. But getting into a space where I'm dealing with race, mental health, class, all of this stuff, it was really kind of a perfect role for me at this point in my life. So that's kind of how I got into mental health.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting thing, because it's almost like the timing was perfect because of what's happening now. So it's like you're just there, like just before the starting line, you're ready, like are there preparing for everything else. So obviously, since that whole thing starting with COVID happened, and it sounded like it didn't really affect you much. So probably the main topic of conversation in terms of mental health, what I've seen on social media, is what happens when after George Floyd passed. And that's always been, I don't know if you have Twitter yourself or Instagram, but it was like a rough few weeks. Like you could literally see people tweeting their life away, like of what's going on, and some people couldn't take it. Some people literally said, I was off social media. I was off it. I was off everything just to keep my peace of mind and various other things. Some people spoke up. Some people, and then people speaking up kind of created something of work exposing certain things, and you could tell who's real and who's not. So, which is kind of like a good thing in the storm, per se. And how did you think of other people's mental health that you were working with? Because that must have affected a little bit, especially in your workplace, especially the people your clientele coming to you and saying, this just happened, I'm seeing all of this, I've experienced this before, I want to express it, but at the same time, like I'm in shock. I can't, like a lot of people that I speak with mental health, they they're sometimes either tired, they're lazy, they don't do anything, they have these spurts of bipolarism, maybe possibly. Like I've experienced some of that, like a little bit of a depression stage. There's so many other aspects. So how does the clientele that you actually have on your side affected that way? Because kids coming to you, as you said, at the age of 11 to 13 to 25, that age group alone is so, that middle part, just the first beginning and the middle, is really delicate as well. That age group is really delicate. So how do you approach this? Because you have to come in the sense of giving them the real information and how we deal with this, and being as passionate as possible, but also making sure that you're not too excessive, because there's some points maybe a lot of people could perceive that as a bit aggressive, or a bit of a forceful way to feed information as well. So
yeah, you've touched on three of the main things that we've been kind of impacted the most in terms of dealing with young people. Like contextually, for the young people we work with, this is probably the first example at an age in their life where they start to see police brutality and the horrors of police brutality in the context of George Floyd and some of the things going around Twitter and Instagram. So from a mental health perspective, and sort of understanding the experience of the young person, what you often get is that initial emotional response of, I want to do work, like this, something has to change, like how is this happening today? And you get all this pent up emotion and passion for wanting to change the system, which is great in a way, because obviously, you know, as much as it's obviously a terrible context that we find ourselves in, one of the positives of social media is, you know, as much as it's damaging, which I'll talk about later on in terms of the dark side of it, it also educates in a way that, you know, kind of bypasses mass media to a certain extent. But you have this pent up like enthusiasm, I want to change the system, but also being young people, there's that not being able to emotionally regulate themselves, because at the end of the day, whether it's a video or whether it's real life, like you said, you're seeing people's lives sometimes on video being taken away. That is going to impact anybody, and it's going to impact especially young people at an impressionable age. And one of the first things we were trying to do during this time was just saying to young people, look, listen, engage with some of this stuff, but be careful, because at the end of the day, like when you're looking at that stuff consistently, it is going to have an impact. It had an impact on me, you know, and I've been in this a lot longer, even though I'm still relatively young. I've been in this a lot longer, and, you know, it impacts me. So I can't imagine what it does to a young person, right? So on one hand, you've got the pent up enthusiasm that's kind of really wanting to make a change, and really for the first time angry at the system. You start to think about, well, this system ain't really fair. But in the same sense, it's also like, oh my God, I've just seen somebody literally get beat up, die, insert graphic content here. How do you manage the two? So yeah, it's been a really delicate balance of channeling that passion and sort of bypassing or not bypassing, that's the wrong term, redirecting the enthusiasm. Instead of looking at Twitter and getting yourself vexed, go to the books and start educating yourself on history a little bit more. Because what you'll find in history is, well, these things have been happening over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and it hasn't changed. So then that gives you a bit more of a context to be like, okay, so it's giving knowledge, but it's also kind of avoiding. You can't avoid everything on social media, but you're kind of redirecting it to an educational format where you're in books and resources as opposed to actual videos and recent kind of events. So it gives more of a contextual understanding. And then it's also a case of being able to regulate that, because obviously if you're seeing them things, you need to have well-being resources to look after yourself. The BAME mental health space has been impacted, particularly with the rise of COVID and with the rise of, a lot of the videos and sort of the Black Lives Matter movement, because you've got COVID but then you've also got the systemic racism aspect of it too. So you're trying to essentially, as hard as it is, give that support to something that's consistently changing, the dynamic changes, and the BAME space has been impacted the most, like I said, by mental health and within the mental health space. So, you know, a lot of young people who access therapy, for example, in a sort of one-to-one, face-to-face format, they can't access it at home because they're in a house full of people that don't necessarily know they're accessing therapy, because to them, therapy and mental health is a stigmatized subject. So they can't access therapy, they're struggling, but they're seeing all of these things in the media, and they're seeing, or they've got all this anxiety around COVID. There's no place for them to talk and vent about it. So we've been having to churn out digital resources to try and bypass that as much as possible, whilst simultaneously educating and trying to provide a bigger contextual picture for young people too. So it was a really delicate balance. You know, we get it right for the most time, but it's hard to know exactly the dynamic, because things, as I said, are changing so much in terms of, you know, not just in terms of COVID, but in terms of the wider systemic racism conversation that we're having in the sort of public eye right now as well. So it's a very, very delicate balance, man.
Yeah, that's fair, because as you said, BAME, that the community that we are in is affected the most in terms of not just COVID, but the entire thing of what's going on socially, and it's also affecting politically now as well. We have seen obviously what's going on in America, but we've also seen what's going on here, that how it's affected everything. As an example of, but there, you can tell that there have been certain changes and how platforms are used. As an example, Marcus Rashford of Manchester United, he's supported through the fact of having free school dinners again, which helps, because back in the day, as we all know, as kids, when we were in secondary school, we had that, and then Jamie Oliver said, "Nah, we need health options, and we got and they got to pay." We was like, "You're ruining our lives." So, and you're ruining our enjoyment of just being kids. Like, we have to, which was kind of a double-edged sword. Like, we got to learn how to make, the kids. You always had a friend that was selling like cans of Coke or sweets and stuff like that. That kind of taught some people money management, and they found that quite early. But for some of us, we didn't get that, which was kind of like the tough part. So some kids couldn't even have school dinners like that. They had to have bread, like sandwiches. They had to make their own. You know what I'm saying? And that was a big effect as well, because sometimes when we get that £3-4, sometimes you'd be like, oh, I could go to the chip shop after school, or I can do this meal here because I don't have that much. This food that I just got for lunch is not fulfilling me, So it was such a big thing for when I first heard it, that was one of his main goals, and using his platform, saying, a guy coming from I wouldn't say poverty sense, but kind of like a struggling background, to where money wasn't as fluid as today compared to some people. So for him to stand up to that, I congratulate him. And other people like Raheem Sterling is another one. Deeney from Watford. There's, obviously Ian Wright has spoken out on how this is affected, and I wish he did a little bit more back in the day. So there are changes, which is good, but at the same time, it's not enough. We still have these problems of, and back to mental health sense of, seeing people on social media flexing their chains, flexing their shoes, flexing their other things, and they're still making money, consistent, like certain consistent income to they're fine when they're fine during this time. But compared to the average guy that had to work a 9 to 5 and either had to be on furlough or quit the job because of access to transportation, various other things, kids as well. It's tough at these times. So I think especially in the children, like the age group that you just said, that's tough already. You've got uni students that are coming out, finish degrees, some of their graduation, when are they going to graduate, stuff like that. So I would say you're in a tough spot, but it sounds like the company you work for has done really well.
Yeah, we have, and I think part of the thing, I work for a very, I like to say, progressive company, in the sense that we're very owning of things that we need to work on, and we're constantly having those uncomfortable conversations. For example, back in February, our team spoke about the issues of systemic racism and mental health, and how that's impacting, a number of BAME communities, not just in Bristol, but across the country. Because we're such a progressive charity in that sense, and we have those conversations, it's easy to think that every other mental health institution in the UK or in Bristol, or sort of anywhere, is the same. And that's sometimes not the case. There are large disparities in mental health that does not reflect BAME people's experience of mental health, because the whole ethos of mental health care in the UK is tailored around a specific person, whether it's young people, whether it's sort of middle-aged people or older people. It's often tailored to and centered around a white middle-class ideology, and that's the issue. Because when people come into your space to access, therapy, and we can talk about some of the stats which are horrendous for BAME people in that space a bit later on, but generally speaking, the actual ethos of mental health within the UK is very tailored towards a specific individual. And you could say, and some people have said to me in the past, well, that's because Britain is white, so we must reflect the majority. Well, it's like, well, let me give you a stat to argue that respectfully. Black people in particular, out of the BAME demographic, are 7 times more likely to experience poor mental health, whether that's young people or older people. So they're drastically overrepresented in the mental health space. So the idea that they're overrepresented means that there should be more representation from a therapy point of view for them to access and have people that understand their experience. So to have a white middle-class therapist that has no experience of what it's like to be BAME or no contextual understanding is a massive disservice to people accessing the service. So we can say, well, it needs to be fitted around the majority, but the fact of the matter is, in terms of certain stats, we're not being represented enough. So we need to look at the numbers before we start making vast conclusions about what the mental health service should be, because at the end of the day, white middle class excludes white working class as well, and it excludes all the other demographics. It's tailored to a specific type of person, which is very, very problematic. So I think there's a lot to be done within the mental health space in the UK, and you can almost be fooled into thinking, well, mental health space here in the UK is doing so well. On a surface level, yes, but when you start looking underneath some of the numbers and some of the facts, you start to think, Ross, like, there is issues here that we're not talking about, we're not making any effort to solve, and as a result, it perpetuates, to be even deeper in a sense, it perpetuates the systemic oppression that's happened for many, many generations because of how it attacks mental health. And attack is the correct word within those spaces. And I can share obviously some stories about that as well, as long as talking about stats. But the fact of the matter is, it's not representative of some of the numbers out there, and that is problematic.
Yeah. I know that the government, like, there are spaces, not just off the record, but there are other government spaces for mental health, I believe. I don't know if there are in Bristol other than you guys. I'm assuming there is, but I've spoken about this as well on the podcast like a few times, of how us men, just in general men, don't express how we feel in an emotional sense that relates to mental health as well, a lot compared to now. I've luckily enough, I've had support in the sense of just the people around me and kind of teaching myself. So I would say I'm very privileged in that sense. But compared to maybe an average Joe whose first time experiencing these emotions and stuff, and being told that to be a man, you have to not show emotion to a certain degree. So I'm assuming there are going to be young children at your age groups that are young kids, that are young boys that come to you and not saying everything, sorry, not saying the actual root to it. So how do you, I wouldn't say program, but how do you teach them to kind of be more expressive at a young age, young as 11? Because at 11 you don't really know your emotional intelligence is not great or not that high. So how, as a guy that possibly has experienced some type of mental health issue, or seen some people that or helped people that had mental health issues, how do you teach that and adapt it to that certain child or person? Because every person is different. Because that's what I've been telling, like, even my female friends or any people, like, we as men, we actually just don't speak. We don't speak about this emotion. It's crazy to hear, but it's a fact.
Yeah. So this is going to be answered in two different ways. So in terms of how I work with young people, or attempt to work with young people, I learned this from somebody, a while back. And it's about appealing to the interests of the young person. So I work with young people, so that's why I'm focusing this at young people.
Yeah.
Because like you said, 11 years old, or the ages that I usually work with, around 14 to 15, coming up sort of 18, you start to see the first examples of what we call repressed emotion. So like not discussing or not even having a conversation about how we feel as men, to contextualize it to your question, as men, and talk about our mental health. So you appeal to the interest. So a lot of the time, because I work with primarily BAME people, a lot of the expression that young BAME males express themselves through is either through sport or music. So it's about contextualizing, okay, what about sport is so appealing to you, or just gives me a time to just not think about anything, just have fun and express yourself. Okay, so what are you trying to not think about? Well, I'm not entirely sure. Okay, that's fair enough. What is it that football gives you that you don't get anywhere else? Teamwork, feeling a part of something, feeling like I belong, feeling like I am valued as a valued member of a team, and feeling like my place is of worth. Okay, fair enough. What about music? Well, I like listening to music because it's like just reflects how I'm feeling. Okay, what do you listen to? I listen to insert genre here. Okay, what is it about that genre? And unpacking it. But what you find is a very similar thing between music and team sports, or sports in general. It's the sense of either belonging, in the sense of teamwork, or feeling understood when it comes to music. My man from the drill beat gets me. He knows what it's like on road. So I like to hear that. Or this music, or this R&B joint that I listen to, but none of my boys know I listen to. The emotions get me, but I can listen to it in private because I don't have to share that with the man then. But like, I love the way the tune just gets my emotional state. Cool, that's fine, man. I'm the same. Or in the team, feeling like I belong, as I said a couple of times already. What it is a dissatisfaction with how that individual fits within the wider societal framework. To be very sort of analytical. So the team provides a place for a person to feel like they belong. With the BAME male experience in school, for example, they're more likely to get expelled. They're more likely to get severe detentions or isolation, as it's called when I was in school. They're more likely to be grossly misgraded. and sort of predicted grades are just mad low compared to their white counterparts. There's a number of different systemic issues that reinforce that message of you don't really belong in this place, and that follows them into university, the workplace. Even if they get to university, or if it goes to the workplace, it follows them into the workplace. The only way they feel that sense of belonging, like they're valued, is in a sports setting or in a team setting. And that's kind of what we find, generally speaking, not to kind of stereotype, but these are the conversations we usually have. And it's about not just taking the young person's answer at face value. Yes, they love football because they love football, or yes, they love music because they love music, but there's a deeper reason why. And as human beings, we are attached to activities, behaviors, and particular pursuits, not just because we like them. They tell us something about ourselves, and they give us that sense of purpose and drive. So if you can identify what that drive is within that young person, then you can start to discuss the root problems very gently, because you're not just going to be like, hey man, you don't feel like you belong, do you? Because that's not going to work. It's going to cause a whole heap of defense mechanisms, and you're not going to get through. But once you can kind of understand a little bit, okay, this person's dealing with identity issues, they don't feel like they belong, you can start to provide them again with education around that subject, and you can start to get them exploring it and thinking about it, but never making it seem as if you're leading them down the road. You want to make it seem as if they're doing it themselves, because that's the power. That's the powerful purpose of education. When you feel like you're doing things yourself and you're discovering things by yourself, you feel great. You feel like you are, to put it lightly, the shit, and you start to actually understand your power within that context. But what that requires us to do, not just as mental health professionals, but even if you've got younger brothers or siblings, particularly at that impressionable age, is to start questioning the taken for granted assumption that my brother likes football just because he likes to play sports, or my brother likes music because everyone likes music. You've got to start having them conversations early, because the earlier you have them, the more easier it is to broach them subjects later down the line. To answer that question. But in terms of a more general analysis of male mental health, we are told from primary school in sort of the UK's context that emotions are not manly. That's more of a feminine pursuit, or that's more of something you'd expect from a female. But the truth of the matter is that is a pure cultural construction, and we just internalize that as fact. And a lot of the time it's kind of explained through science, right? So, men have more testosterone, so they're more likely to be aggressive, or they're more likely to be domineering. No, fam, it's a societal narrative that makes men feel like they own and dominate stuff. Biology is just a sequence of genes. Culture allows that behavior to happen. It's culture that's the culprit. But we used to look at biology as if biology is this fact for human behavior. Human behavior has been constructed since the sort of cognitive revolution, thousands and thousands of years before sort of any sort of religion was in place. So culture has ruled humanity for literally hundreds of thousands of years. But we never have these conversations with our young people. Like, they just assume from age 10 that, oh, my biology means that I'm more aggressive and I don't need to speak about how I feel, or these are the behaviors that I have to sort of display in public. And that's why we have a mental health crisis with men, because they want to fit this idea of what ideal masculinity is when they don't fit it. So if you don't fit it, you're in that constant conflict between, I know what I'm like in myself. I'm the biggest sensitive guy going. Like, that's fact. Like, man was bawling at normal people. You see normal people on BBC? I was crying, bro. Like, it done me in. Like, I took a couple of days off work and everything. I could not have that conversation 2 years ago with people.
100.
Oh man, with normal people, man was bothering that. I couldn't do it because I feel internalized that narrative of, if I'm telling people I'm crying, these men are gonna think I'm soft. I'll probably get like bantered for a few weeks about it. You're afraid of that banter.
I've had that.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So it's like we need to start having these conversations earlier with young people, young men in particular, and to say, look, listen, if you want to cry, if you want to get emotional, if you're angry, if you're upset, if you're frustrated, if you don't feel like you belong, that's okay. We can have that conversation. But until you start talking about that and telling us how you feel, you're just going to sit and suffer. And what's going to happen over the years, that frustration is going to get buried and buried and buried and buried until one day somebody says something stupid to you and you just explode, because that's years and years and years of pent up frustration and anger inside of you. But the media will say, oh, these men are just violent. Nah, it's a systemic
thing.
something.
Yeah, systemic thing. And literally we've seen it now. We've literally just seen that explosion. And so I would suggest anyone listening or watching to just, if you feel a certain type of way, that you feel like maybe even whether it be bipolarism, depression, whatever, anything like that, either because in some way, shape, or form, friendship, your friends and your family are free therapists to a degree. That's just my experience anyway. And if you feel like it doesn't help, I believe there are free workshops and so forth that people have access to, that are either provided by certain charities like yourselves, or I believe some probably by the government as well. I've heard that there is a company in London that do loads of workshops in that sense all over the country, but I forgot their names. I wish I got their name, but so I would say just use free. If you can't afford it, just there's free available workshops where you can just turn up, and they're there to help. That if they're there to, they've decided to work this because they want to make a change, use that. Like it's there. So it's just that we have to kind of, as men and women of different ages, we have to be kind of brave and say, I'm going to do this, just because there's loads of obviously blockages. There's ego, perception in life, and various other things. So I think mental health is important, especially during this time. So I wish that on everybody to, if you need help, like also if you feel like you haven't talked to someone, just call someone. Like that's so important. Like there was, because I don't know, I'm assuming you have Twitter.
I don't have Twitter now, but I have Instagram now.
Yeah.
I see tweets though.
Yeah. But there was an incident on the timeline recently about this ties into what we kind of see on social media that's affecting mental health as well. There was an incident of a list created by women that were assaulted, sexually assaulted, that felt like they were sexually assaulted, but never spoke on it. So there was I don't know, I forgot the profile, but that specific profile said, put it on timeline, said, listen, if you've ever been oppressed or sexually abused or various other things that you feel not comfortable, that you haven't spoken about or don't want to speak about, you feel like it's a trigger warning, can you please DM me and compile the list. It's not just Twitter was there, it was also Instagram people, but also there was a lot of famous people on there as well. But that specific list was only created for women, so that people in the timeline, when they see it, they can avoid these types of people. Unfollow them, whether it be cancel all ties or maybe a report as well. Obviously that kind of, loads of information is leaked about who it was and various other things. A lot of celebrities came out as well, female celebrities, about how they felt like they were sexually abused and like whatever. And there was a lot of men that were there saying, like, defense mechanism, as you said, like when they saw it, imagine it was on a Friday, like done on a Friday, it's the last day of the week, stressful long day, bang, that happens, and the whole internet just went crazy. So because it's funny, I don't know if you've watched this show called I May Destroy You.
I've heard about it. Yeah, I've heard about it.
Yeah, it's like this. It's weird because it was literally the same time I watched that, and then that happened, and I was like, holy, like this is crazy, because I've even, luckily enough, like I saw a lot of people tweeting that I knew that were women, and they were saying like, don't make this a joke and or whatever. Because there were a lot of people making jokes, and some of the how do you say, like apologies on, when celebrities do apology on notes.
Yeah.
And they screenshot it and then they post it on the timeline and Twitter and Instagram and stuff. I've seen a few of those, and some of them wasn't really. They didn't really, they spoke about it cool, but just look wookie. I've had a conversation with one of the women that are close to me about this, and I just made sure, like, are you okay about what's going on? Because this, like, these people, women were tweeting like outrage, like just rage. So I spoke to one, and it was just like, are you okay? Is everything all right? Just check up, because this is a big deal, especially what's happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. And this is another extension of this, what's going on.
Of course.
So they would, the only thing I had with, a lot of people were saying about proof. You know what you know how I feel about that. Like, that's just stupid to tweet about it. Imagine someone saying to you, if you bought something, and then they've seen you, they're the one that served you, so you come out, you come back in, and it's like, oh, I found something else, but you're looking for the receipts. They say, oh, what's your receipt? Can I see your receipt? And you're looking at them a little bit like, you obviously have the receipt on you, but at the same time you're just looking at it like, why? Because you saw me literally buy the thing half an hour ago. So that was it. And obviously women go mad as well again. Everything has gone mad. And the only issue I had with that list was, which I was praying for when I finished work, was, and I was speaking to someone about it, said, I hope no one used it as a plot for revenge, a plot for pettiness, because there are people out there, this is not just a woman thing, it's a men thing as well, where when there's an opportunity to diminish someone that you feel like has done you bad, they will use it recklessly. And I hope that, I literally spoke about it, like, I hope that it is true, that list does have authenticity and it's all facts, the people in that list, but at the same time, I hope that there's no people that are wrongly accused in there, because especially during this time, like, it's kind of not good to tell lies. It's not good to spread rumors that aren't true, especially in that platform that was meant to be for safety of women. And so, like, I don't know if you've experienced that type of client before, where they felt like they've been sexually abused, but if you look at it, what's your take? Like, what the one I've just said, what in a sense of outside of it, what do you see?
I see, again, I need some more contextual info, but like what I see, what COVID and lockdown has done for a lot of people has given them time to sit and reflect on a lot of different things. And with what's been going on, more generally speaking, within culture, with the Black Lives Matter movement, we start to have these conversations about injustice. And we start to have these conversations, and we start to say, you know what, that's not right. That's not right. This is not right. This isn't right. And I think what the Black Lives Matter in 2020 has done has allowed us to not only look at race as an oppressive force, but the intersections of race and how race is impacted by gender, how it's impacted by sexuality, how it's impacted by class, all of these things. And how I view that, in terms of what you said, is as men in culture, as identifying males, we have a responsibility to basically allow women to communicate and talk about things that are even uncomfortable to us. And so in the context of having this conversation about, you know, potential people, individuals that have perpetuated abuse or you know, some form of discrimination, however you want to conceptualize that, there should be a platform where that's allowed to happen, and it shouldn't, like you said, it shouldn't be something that is policed for proof, because that therein lies the issue with masculinity. Prove it to me that that's what you're saying is true. Like this conversation isn't something that, you know, we should just be like, okay, what can I do to support you? Instead, it's prove it to me before I can support you. Because essentially, when we deconstruct that idea, what we're saying is, I'll believe you, but you have to prove to me that, you know, what you're going through is something that is actually truthful, and that, you know, you're essentially asserting a level of superiority, whether we like to acknowledge that or recognize that or not. It's very similar to conversations, and I'm not making direct comparisons, but there's a very similar thing with white fragility and masculine fragility, because we are very, so men generally speaking they hold a degree of power in society, so does whiteness. In the context of this, men are so triggered by people questioning their power, their dominance, or you know, their specific space, that they lash out with this cognitive dissonance of, well, prove it to me. And what does that even mean, bro? If you're not instigating this, or if you're not involved in this, why are you telling people to prove it? What you're just perpetuating the problem further, and you're making it even more difficult to discuss these issues in a space, like you said, where it's supposed to be something that's safe sharing for women. This ain't even about you, but somehow you've managed to make an issue on feminine exploitation or female exploitation or sexual discrimination, however you want to conceptualize it. You've made that a male issue. Like, by putting that question in, prove it to me, you've reversed it, and you've totally missed the point. And I think what these things are doing is they're showing how people very frequently miss the point when it comes to having discussions about inequality. Because as men, we don't want to have a conversation about patriarchy, because it's like, oh, you know,
very true.
Things are equal now. You know, this ain't the 20s anymore. But when you really look at the societal structure of the 20s, and you think, oh, but feminism is a thing now. Feminism is a thing mostly for white liberal women. Black women within the space still really don't have, you know, a platform to discuss femininity, gender, and race openly, because race gets shut down, or their race and gender gets shut down by white liberals or white, you know, conservatives, how we want to sort of conceptualize it. So it's really, what you've described to me is what I call the kind of defense mechanism of power. You don't like
ego.
You don't like being called out, even though it's not you directly. You assume the societal figure of masculinity, and you're like, they're drawing me out. Right, let's come for it. And it's like, well, no, you're missing the point. What we're saying is, if you want to make society more safe, if you want to actually support the women, like you've been performatively posting on your Twitter, I stand with women, Black Lives Matter. But when suddenly conversations get a bit too real for you, start whipping out the prove it. It shows the individual for what they are, and I think that platform is perfect. You know, and I think there should be more initiatives online like that to start outing people who are blatantly using power to their advantage and subordinating women, or, you know, in some cases potentially men in particular spaces. But really, the conversation here, like you said, is about women and about how women feel within the space. So let's not taint it with what about men, or what about who. Let's just make it about what it's supposed to be about, and understand the context.
Yeah, and just read the room. Like, that's the title of this episode. Read the damn room. Don't just think that you're tweeting something because it's gonna help the situation. Not the situation. You're gonna be involved in this topic. You're involving something that doesn't have nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
Like, it's just to me, when I looked at everything and I see these people that say like, oh, it's crazy, whatever, and they're like saying as the words like, you prove it, why men do this, men have this too, what about us? I'm like, that's not the time for that. You're read the room and say, listen, I wouldn't say not say anything, but I will be as delicate as I can and how I comment on this. But first off, find out how the women around you, as well as that, they're the most important people that you need to speak to at that specific time, because those women, you're not going to know everything about their lives. You're not going to know anything about their experiences with men. So you have to ask them first, like, how are they actually doing in this, especially when they see that on Twitter, they see this on Instagram, they see these various other things. You have to be a bit more empathetic for them. And it's just, use your brain, engage your brain. Do you have a degree? Don't you have a degree? Like, you're a grown man. You know what I'm saying? So,
but sorry.
Yeah, like at the age of 18, apparently we're meant to be adults. But so, are you not an adult?
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
I think I'm going to draw two parallels. Like we see with masculinity, like we say, like it's almost because you've assumed a position of power when it comes to issues around, sexual discrimination or patriarchy, because it's something that's directly challenging power. You've grown up with the idea, whether you realize it or not. And I said this the other day, actually, like as men, we grow into a system of misogyny, whether we realize it or not. Our behaviors, if we leave them unchecked, are discriminatory in their nature. Like we're just this, like the way the system is set up, it's an unequal power balance, and that's the top and bottom of it. And you have to understand and engage with the other side. And I don't mean to, split gender into two in terms of male and female. But what I'm saying with the other side is masculinity is a tiny component of gender identities. Right? It's a very small component, but it's the biggest and most dominant. Like when we're trying to understand femininity or the non-binary experience, all of these things that are impacting individuals within that space, we just assume that masculinity is the superior, and therefore when masculinity gets questioned, we must respond with like stuff. But the fact of the matter is, the responses prove how uneducated we are, and I include myself in this conversation too, because whilst I engage with feminist literature, or whilst I engage with and try to understand as much as possible of the LGBT plus experience, I don't know it all, because there's a specific amount of privilege that I hold as a male that sometimes makes understanding and at least initially trying to wrap my head around things difficult, because it's not because I don't understand it, but it's about getting my head around, right, have I really perpetuated this behavior for so long? But it's that education process. If you understand that, right, even if I don't realize I'm doing something, I'm still doing it. Like being able to acknowledge that is the whole point of these conversations. But instead what happens is we get triggered, and I say we generally, as in men get triggered on Twitter and feel like they need to defend their masculinity, as opposed to going, instead of saying prove it, just say I stand in solidarity, let me know if I can help. What's the difference? Oh, you're accepting that even though it's not you that's being attacked, you represent a group of people in society that do discriminate or do make lives hard for other people. So you're just saying, how can I help? And it's the same thing with the White Lives Matter people. It's like, well, all lives matter. Why are we making it about Black lives? Well, you clearly missed the context of which this conversation is happening, and you haven't educated yourself on anything to do outside of your white privilege bubble. Because again, if you were actually educating yourself on the wider context, you would say, raw, maybe I am a bit of a dickhead. Maybe I am a bit discriminatory. Maybe I am a bit racist. Maybe I am a bit xenophobic, but I don't realize it because I've never really engaged with it. And that's what happened when we leave people unchecked in their privilege or unchecked in their assumptions. And I think what's happening now is people are being called out for it, and they don't like it, but they'll continue to get called out because what's happened, like I said, going back to the beginning, COVID has given us an opportunity to not just reflect on ourselves, it's given us a chance to reflect on the system in general. It's given us time to read, explore, understand. Some people have been using it not for that, but for most people, it's a case of, okay, I've got some work to do. And whilst that process is still happening, you're going to get those initial hostile people who don't want to educate themselves, but they will eventually, you know, and this comes from people advocating on behalf of others as well, right? If you see somebody saying that stupidness, call them out too, because at the end of the day, like, the more people are attempting to correct is the more chance that things are actually going to go in. And I think, like, culturally, where we stand at the minute, we stand on patriarchy and whiteness being the two primary definers of, like, this country. And what's happening is whiteness is being challenged in a way that's never been challenged before. We've got people that are saying whiteness is the issue and whiteness is what we're trying to tackle, not just now, but across history. Let us know the full picture. Whiteness is under attack. And white people, and I say white people generally, are feeling for the first time, or first time in a long time, I don't know, because I haven't been around that long, but they feel like, oh shit, people are attacking us, this can't be right, all lives matter. It's a defense mechanism. It's that same thing. And I feel like we're in a very interesting time when it comes to that, because I believe this time, you know, and it might just be my optimism and sort of where I position myself in my work, but I feel like this is really the time to start laying a foundation for change. And when I say change, I don't mean we're going to change the system in 2 years. If anyone tells you they've got the answer to what's going on, whether that's with patriarchy, discrimination in terms of white supremacy or white privilege or white power, if anyone tells you they've got the answer, they're lying, because it's a big issue. Like, there's no
one line answer. There's no solution that makes it go away with some fingers doing this. Like, there's none. So I completely agree on that, especially in the sense of what's going on. And I think the fact that the generation now is tackling it now, it's gonna be different, I think, in the next few years. And this is just me being optimistic.
Yeah, of course. But, you know, as much as I'm optimistic, there's also a level of realism in the sense that when people are talking about revolutionizing the system and changing the system, like, just to kind of change it, but maintaining the context in which we're talking about, right? But let's just use the example of masculinity being, or male privilege or white privilege, whatever that is, the primary positions of power in society. If we're looking to change that, we first need to understand the conditions of which that power is built upon. That's the first step. And whether we're talking about race, whether we're talking about gender inequalities, whether we're talking about class inequalities, there's a common denominator in all three of those things, and it's capitalism. Capitalism is one of those things where people miss it because they're just like, they're so indoctrinated into capitalism as a system. And I'm not a Marxist, by the way, but it's just a very interesting thing that I've noticed in my own work, is the idea that race, class, gender imbalances, inequality in general, stems from the economy or capitalist systems. You know,
money.
If we want to,
it's all around about money.
If we want to talk about race, we want to see, you know, the idea of racism. Like, I had this conversation with someone the other day. Racism, like, someone said to me, yeah, well, racism's been around for millions of years. So, well, yeah, okay, racism has been around for millions of years, or xenophobia, however you want to conceptualize that. But racism, how we know it today, in terms of the discrimination that we face, or the systemic issues, stem from capitalism. And there is a historical record that supports this when it comes to slavery as a method of perpetuating capitalism. Yes, black people were indoctrinated into a slave system, but they were indoctrinated into that system because white people, or the people who owned property, needed work done to build the systems that we live in today. It's a capitalist ideology. It's an exploitation. If we remove this black person of their rights, what we do is we basically turn them into a commodity, not a person. If they're a commodity, they work as long as we tell them to work. It's built in capitalism, to really simplify that. The same thing happens with gender. We talk about masculinity being the driving force. There is a direct link, in my opinion, between patriarchy and capitalism. Most men, CEOs, owners of property in the world are male. They own it, they have most money, they sit in the positions of power in really powerful institutions in society. Therefore, they have the bargaining power. They have that ability to operate from that patriarchy. If you take money away, you take power away, right? And it's kind of that same thing. Capitalism has a lot to answer for, and I'm aware that it's an oversimplified view. But for the context of what I'm saying, when we're looking at power across the board, we need to look at the way in which power is built. The economy is one of them things. Political power is another one of them things. Politics, again, dominated by men, dominated by white men. It's the same thing. There is that similarity between the economic state of us and the political state of us, and both of them reflect white, middle class, male. That gives you the answer of how inequality is perpetuated. If you're in them positions of power, you control things. And this is kind of what we're trying to do from a mental health perspective too, when we work with young people, is we're letting them know from early, this is the system and these are the key players. You know, in order to understand the system, you've got to understand it like a game.
Connect the dots. Just connect the dots. You know what I'm saying? Connect the dots.
People, identify the key players, identify the key places, and then make your own decisions. Key players at the moment are, America, Western Europe. But we'll see, I think, in the next 50 to 100 years, China and sort of the bloc economies, or how you call that, sort of Brazil, India, these economies will also become world powers. And people are scared about it, especially over in Western Europe, because they're like, oh my God, our power is going to go. What happens if whiteness isn't the most powerful race in the world? What happens if men are the most powerful rulers of the world? People are shook, but that's just because education is starting to break through a little bit. And the key players in this are often, at this moment in time, white, middle class, politicians or economists. That's what runs the game. And I think we've got to understand that, people are saying burn down the system. You can't burn down the system because the system runs on capitalism and a whole different sort of kettle of fish. You eliminate the people, the system still remains. You can't just burn down capitalism. What's the alternative? You've got to understand it and understand how you can sort of infiltrate it and make it more representative. And I know I'm going on some mad political rant, but it's
no, because I agree with you 100%, bro. Where does our taxes go? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like that's plain and simple. Where does some of the taxes that we pay for, whether it be road tax, not road tax, but like I don't want to get into it, but there are taxes that we pay on the low from our own bank accounts that help them people, the capitalist society, to survive. Because then that's a complete fact. It's a complete fact. So
here's an interesting fact for you though. I don't know if it's a fact. Let me just remove the fact element. I was reading from some people that I know today. They were saying that, the Nightingale hospitals in terms of COVID saw around 54 people attended the Nightingale hospital. And the government have allegedly sold off the PPE equipment or the equipment for the Nightingale hospital to private hospitals in and around London, even though they are paid by taxpayer money. So the madness is that equipment that we paid for in terms of tax has been given to a private sector that we don't invest in through our tax system. So it's like you're seeing injustice of capitalism and buying power in life, in every day, but we don't necessarily pay attention to it. And that's not the conversation you really want to have with an 11-year-old or a 13-year-old where we're talking about the deepness of economy. But at the end of the day, there are politics within economics as well as there are politics in the sort of geopolitical state too. Like there's politics is everywhere. And what I'm saying is the system is built around inequality, and the inequalities, if you're not white or middle class, you're going to be impacted by that by default. that's how it kind of, that's how the game is played, for lack of a better term. That's the key component of the game. You know?
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. Everything that we've detailed and everything else I agree 100%. But I do want to speak to someone about I May Destroy You. So anyone listening or anything like that, I would recommend for everyone to watch that, because it's an eye opener, and the way it's set up. Because I don't know, I forgot her name. The main actress, she was on a series called Bubblegum, I believe.
I recognize the main actress. Yeah.
Yeah, she's been on a few series, and that she was in a series on Channel 4 or Channel 5, called Bubblegum. She's not a comedian per se, but she's just a really good actress that's involved in comedy as well. I forgot her name, but I wish I would like to have a conversation with her. Actually, that'd be amazing. With her journey, because I when I found about her was like last year, and I was like, oh, who is this? And everyone was talking about bubblegum or chewing gum. I think it was chewing gum. The show's called Chewing Gum. So everyone was talking about it, and I was just like, this looks interesting. So I watched a bit of it, and I was like, it's very entertaining. So I recommend that as well. So anyone who wants to have something to watch is definitely I May Destroy You. Insecure's finished, so I'm like, I'm just tired, bro. I need something else to watch. So yeah, man. So